Okay, good afternoon. My name is Rochelle Rose, and I'm the National Director of Actors Programs here at the SAG-AFTRA Foundation. Thank you. Today I'm really thrilled to be in conversation with Mark Fincannon. Mark has won 3 Emmy Awards, 4 Artios Awards, has been nominated for 15 Artios Awards, is cast with his siblings Lisa May and Craig Fincannon the vast majority of work that's produced in the Southeast and outside of New York and LA, but perhaps more importantly, is widely recognized by his peers as being one of the kindest men in show business. So you have a treat ahead of you, ladies and gentlemen, Mark Fincannon.
Thank you. Truly humbled to be here. This day is about you because I couldn't do what I do if you don't do what you do. And what you have to do is 10 times harder than anything I have to do. To kind of back up, or just to give you a little bit of my story, I am from North Carolina. I was born and grew up there. My father was a banker. I had an older brother, Craig, who's 3 years older than I am, and a younger sister, a year younger, named Nancy. And my mom just wanted a little culture. We were in a little town of about 10,000 people. My brother and I always called it Bedford Falls, if y'all know where that little town is. And so my brother took piano lessons, and then she took me and my sister and I to a local one-room house that had a wooden floor and a mirrored wall and a ballet bar. And my sister and I started doing tap, jazz, and ballet together when I was 6 years old. So that kind of unlocked something in me in terms of just the creative side of the human experience, in a sense, in that, you know, taking a piece of music and then doing an interpretive impression of that for the enjoyment of an audience. I mean, it's really just that simple. That's what we do. We tell stories. We tell stories by taking material, interpreting that material, trying to bring it to life on a level that all of us would be moved by it, right? And so anyway, I mean, the reason it's so difficult for me, truly, even emotionally, to even be here today, because you couldn't make this story up. You know, never lived a day in my life in New York or Los Angeles. I from there ended up in a college in Salisbury, North Carolina, Catawba College, where I ended up walking across the street one day. I went there because one of my best friends was going there. I didn't know what I wanted to do. And 3 weeks before going off to college, he called me and said, I'm going somewhere else. So my mom and dad dropped me off on this small campus. Fortunately, it was just 1,000 students. I think the college was smaller than my high school. But I walked across the street one day, and there was the most magnificent theater I've ever walked in my life. It was 2,500-seat theater with a balcony and the largest proscenium I've ever seen. And I just said, I'm home. And so for 4 years, I acted on that stage a lot. That was a big theater, but when you went onto the stage, if you looked to the right, there was a firewall, and when you lifted the firewall, there was a 350-seat little thrust theater with its own lighting system, and then we built a black box one-act play out of a rehearsal space behind there that's still going on today, where students do one acts on the weekends, get a couple dollars a head to come in and see a one-act play. But even at that, I thought, I loved every minute of those 4 years, but I still had no idea what I was going to do with my life, as many of us have journeyed, I'm sure. And my junior year in college, I ended up with 5 other classmates deciding during spring break to go to New York just to run around New York, see some Broadway shows. And I ended up down in the village, Greenwich Village, and I saw this really bizarre transvestite movie called Rocky Horror Picture Show. And my brother was a theater manager in Charlotte, assistant theater manager in Charlotte out of college. And the next weekend when I went to stay with him over the weekend, I just said, Craig, and in those days, it was about a 4-year period from the late 70s and the early 80s, which will give you an idea of my age, where midnight movies were a really big deal. Kids would go to the movies at midnight and see a 2-hour movie and come home 2:30 in the morning. And so the theater owners were looking for those kinds of movies that would be for stoners, right? And misfits like all of us. So anyway, so I said, Craig, you got to find out how to get a print of Rocky Horror Picture Show. And they brought newspapers and squirt guns, and they knew every line in it. So he called his fraternity brothers and sisters and said, hey, I'm showing a movie this weekend. If y'all come out and bring newspapers, squirt guns, I'll let you in free. He lined them up in front of the theater, and he called the Charlotte Observer, and he said, I got kids out here lined up to come see a movie. You've got to see this to believe it. It sold out for 2.5 years, and it really is what launched Rocky Horror out of New York. Because if it could play in the Bible Belt of Charlotte, it could play anywhere in the world, which in fact it did. That's what ultimately got me to Charlotte, and so my brother and I started doing promotion and publicity for the industry because the studio executives called us, said, how did this happen? We like the way you guys think. We'll hire you to help promote our movies in the Carolinas. And so that's how we started in 1980. And 3 years later, Universal brought a very big movie to Charlotte, a comedy set in the world of NASCAR, and it starred Burt Reynolds and Lonnie Anderson. Burt and Lonnie at that time were Tom and Nicole, or probably a better example today would be, who? There you go. They were the biggest stars in the world, okay? And we got in line to do extra work. We wanted to be a part of the movie. So we went through the whole deal. We worked as extras on Stroker Ace was the name of the movie. And we met the Atlanta Extras casting director, a man named Stratton Leopold, who went on to become a producer of Star Trek and many other things. But when Strat left Charlotte, we said, hey, can we keep your extras cards? Because another movie we don't know, might come to North Carolina. If it does, we'd love to have the cards already with the names and phone numbers. So he left them behind, and to press you on through, ultimately, a year later, Dino De Laurentiis sent Frank Capra Jr. to North Carolina to find a plantation location, which he found in Wilmington, North Carolina. It was called Orton Plantation, and that was the key location for the Stephen King movie Firestarter, which starred Drew Barrymore and when she was 8 years old, and George C. Scott and Martin Sheen and Art Carney. I mean, it had a phenomenal cast. So my brother and I jumped in the car and rode down and said, hey, can we help you pull together your extras? And we're actors. I studied as an actor, got a degree as an actor. My brother studied at University of North Carolina at Charlotte as an actor as well. So we kind of had that as a background. But Frank Capra Jr. said, sure, guys, come on down. I'll hire you. So the first paycheck we ever got in the film business in casting was extras casting contract for Firestarter. We were living in Charlotte at the time, so we temporarily relocated to Wilmington as we do. We'll go work on these movies. And I thought, this is going to be a blast. Now, when it's over, I'll go back to Charlotte. We'll figure out what we want to do for a living. Dino, during that movie, fell in love. He was 58 years old. He'd been married 30 years. Sadly, that marriage hadn't survived the loss of a child of theirs several years earlier. And Dino met an accountant in his office in New York who came down to work as an accountant on Firestarter, and they fell in love along the coast of North Carolina, and love literally set up my career. Martha said to Dino, it's not time for you to retire. It's time for you to take your resume to the stock market, raise your own money, make your own movies, build your own studio. And you can do it here cheaper than anywhere else in the world. And look what they pulled off in a small little town that a movie had never been made in. We had 1,500 extras. We had, quite a cast. The Los Angeles casting director was Joanna Ray, one of the most classy, thoughtful, caring individuals I think I've ever met. And she had already cast the whole movie on the West Coast, but she came to Wilmington because she had 5 or 6 roles that she had not cast. And she was looking around, called the local theater department and said, can I come meet some of your actors and that kind of thing? Well, we ended up meeting Joanna because we were doing extras and we were in the office next door. So we kind of got to see what she did. And we also said, hey, we know the theater people. We'll call in a few people. She said, it'd be great. And Dino took his resume to the market, created a company called De Laurentiis Entertainment Group, and they raised $270 million in a 3-day public offering. And over the next 4 years, Dino produced and we shot 23 feature films in Wilmington, North Carolina, a little town of 75,000 people. With each show, you would have a cast of 60. Well, they're not bringing 60 people from Los Angeles or New York. They'd break it down and say, well, we'll bring probably 50. But I'm sure we can find 10 of them here in this area. Well, obviously Wilmington was a small town, so we had to start thinking in our mind, can we go to Charlotte? It's just 3 hours away. They can drive down in, 3 hours, maybe up to Norfolk, Virginia Beach. Maybe there's some actors up there, maybe over in Columbia, maybe over in Atlanta, actually. So that's kind of how we started, just saying, hey, we got to do what we got to do to get actors in here that will be cheaper than flying actors in from Los Angeles. So that set up, so now I'm 3.5 years later, I have more on my resume than I, honest to God, would have probably had in a lifetime's work if I had moved to California. It was simply by where we lived, the situation that presented itself, the need that was there, and we just attacked it and said, we'll do what we need to do. I think we started with, there were 3 agents, one in Raleigh, North Carolina, one in Norfolk, none certainly in Wilmington. There was an agent in Charlotte. They primarily did local commercials, hospital commercials, car dealerships, that kind of thing. And but there's talent everywhere. There's simply talent everywhere. It's just a matter of going out. Well, as if that isn't enough of great fortune, the third film that I worked on, the casting director was a man named Len Stallmaster. Len Stallmaster really he started what we know today, casting. An individual or a company being hired by the studio or by independent producers to go out and cast their movies. And he's the first casting director to have his name at the beginning of a movie, casting by. And many of you, I'm sure, have seen the documentary. Well, Len is the kind of casting director who, if he did a film on location, he went and lived on location. And he would do an open call. And he would meet everybody one-on-one in a room. So I was out front with 2 and 3 and 4 and 500 people who thought they were actors. Some had headshots or resumes, some didn't. But this was an avenue. This was an opportunity to discover whether this is something they could really do or not. And Len would patiently sit in there. He also would contact whatever agents he could to say, send over your talent. But Len would look under every rock. And he was a man who loved actors. He was kind. He read with every actor. And so he asked me to join him by running camera for him. So I just sat day after day after day with Len and watched him work with actors and watch him read these scenes with actors. And he even went to New York, and I went with him to New York, and he would stay in the same room in the Mayflower Hotel on the corner of Central Park every time he ever went there. And everybody knew that was Len's casting space. And we had Jeff Daniels and Mickey Rourke and all these guys just laying on the floor up and down the hall waiting for their opportunity to come in. So it was unreal. It really was unreal. And out of that, just each show, we just proved that there's more and more talent that we could cast in the region as opposed to bringing in from Los Angeles. And then that company sadly didn't really survive through the end of the 80s, and a new company came in and bought the studio and kept it going. But Dino had created basically a manufacturing plant for film in Wilmington at the studio. So any producer could come in, sit down, they had their desk, they bring their DP, they bring their, above the line, and then we'd go to work. And as more blessed fortune would have it, Andy Griffith, was doing a show called Matlock, and they had done 6 seasons of it, and he said, I'm done, I'm retiring, I'm ready to go back to North Carolina. Well, the show was doing very, very well for CBS. So they said, well, Andy, what if we moved the show to North Carolina? And that way on the weekends, you can just run home and we'll bring you back. And he said, well, I'll look into that. And I think they told him they'd pay him $1 million an episode too. So in season 7, 8, and 9 of Matlock, 66 episodes we shot in Wilmington with Andy working in his home state of North Carolina. That then set up, this is a great place to do television series. So we had a little pilot come to town called Dawson's Creek. Dawson's Creek ran for 6 years, and right behind that we had another little pilot called One Tree Hill. One Tree Hill ran for 9 years. So we had 15 years of television series. Every 7 days, another script, another director, another set of actors. I mean, like I said, you can't make this up. And we simply were fortunate enough to be there and did have a love for telling story, a love for acting. As much as you all are here because you love to act, the fact is I continue to be able to act. I just didn't have to carry the pressure of the other side of actually getting the job, right? So, and that's why, and I want you to fully understand why I have such respect for you and what you're doing. Because when I graduated from college, of course, I went right to Charlotte. Well, I thought, well, shoot, I'm going to throw my acting resume into the game as well. And I grabbed an agent, Jan Thompson Agency in Charlotte, and I got a headshot and resume. I should have brought it and put it up for you. You could laugh at it. But she called me in for my first audition, and it was a commercial audition, and it was in her office. And I went in, and they closed the door, and I'm looking at that soulless eye. And then there were like 3 or 4 people behind the desk who looked kind of soulless. And I was supposed to sell something. I mean, it was the scariest thing I've ever done in my life. I walked out, I closed the door, went straight across the hall to my agent's office and said, this is not me. Kick me out on the stage with tap shoes. I'll dance all night long, but I will never go back into that room like that again. And that's when she said, why don't we do this? I am now getting small one-page scripts for commercials for hospitals and car dealerships. Why don't I hire you a couple days a week to come over here, pull the facts of the scene off, and talk with my actors about the scene and help them get their very best performance, and you can record it. And then we'll send the tape over to the client. Having no idea that's what I would do for the rest of my life. Because this was all previous to going to Wilmington. This was while in Charlotte, right out of college. So I kind of took it upon myself to never forget how difficult that room was. And to do everything in my power. And I see a lot of friends here that we've been in the room together many times over the year. It's moving to see you. Devin, Susan. I hope you would tell people that I do everything I can within this barbaric system of going into a room with no props, no anything, and taking 2 pages out of a 120-page story and trying to somehow bring life to that. That's archaic. I mean, really, when it boils down to it, that's archaic system. David Lynch helped me with that. I did Blue Velvet with David Lynch. It was my 5th movie. So David and I talked through about 12 roles that we needed to cast in Wilmington. And so David and I spent about an hour together just talking about those roles. And he said, I want you to bring in 2 actors that you think would be right for each of these 12 roles. You can give them the sides of the character that we're considering them for, but now I'm wanting to talk like David. But but he would say, and David wore the same shirt every single day. That was one decision he never had to worry about making. But David would say, he just said, you can give them the sides, but tell them they won't be reading. And they would come into the room and they would sit down and they would just say, whatever conversation would come up, that's just a conversation he'd have with the actor. And for 5 minutes they would talk. The actor would kind of rub their nose or kind of squirm in their seat, or he just observed their natural nuances. And he said, thank you very much. Great to meet you. We'll be in touch, And when it was all said and done, because I was so young and still learning how to do this, I said, David, just help me with your approach. He said, well, Mark, the truth is this is an archaic system, this audition system. He said, you're giving them 2 or 3 pages of my 120-page story, and they got to come in here and somehow make sense of that. I've got time later that I can help them get a sense of the story I'm trying to write and tell, but they're never going to create that here. So from early on, I just realized, you know what? It's more about the nuances of who you are right now. What you sound like, how you move, what your tics are, what your quirks are. Not that you can't act into other things, but generally, because there's so many actors out there available to us for all of these different roles, it's really more about you, your essence, who you are, your tics, your natural bend that wins the day generally. And you really don't know how you're going to react in a given scene until you're in that moment. You can practice it in the mirror, you can practice it with a best friend, but until you're on the set with Robert Downey Jr., you don't know how you're going to react. So you've got to be ready to know, hey, I'm just going to be as prepared as I can be. Wynn Everett is a dear friend of mine. I don't know if any of y'all know her as an actress, but I met her many years ago in New York. She came out here, had a 15-year, really nice career, now lives in Georgia, in Atlanta. And I heard her sharing about what she had learned in an acting class, and there were 3 principles, and I'd never heard these before, and they're worth writing down. One is, acting is not a performance, it's a transformance. So you're not coming in to perform, you're coming in to be transformed. You're coming into a moment that you're going to live in, which is going to be a bit of a transformation. The other one is, it's not a proving ground. Acting is not a proving ground, it's a playground. So come in to play. Come in to be willing to experience a transformation. And then the last one is, and this is the one I usually close on, and we'll hit it again before we leave here today. There's nothing better in all of life than to give. So her last principle is, be more interested than interesting. Because we have a tendency, and that's why, though I may appear to be up here and be comfortable, and I may be talking about myself a lot, I'm not necessarily comfortable in talking about myself to be interesting to you, but I genuinely want to be interested. Rochelle could tell you, I will be at that door, and every one of us will look each other eye to eye, and we'll shake our hand before you leave here, because this day is about you. I want to remember you, even if it's just for a moment. I want to have that moment. I don't... Anyway, it's better to, actors work so hard on their own stuff that when they get there, they forget there's a whole other half of this scenario, and that's the other actor. So I've always said, and I discovered this on doing Dawson's Creek for 6 years with Greg Prange, the producer. Greg Prange had been an editor before he became a producer, and Greg Prange produced every episode of Dawson's Creek and every episode of One Tree Hill. And because he approached every show from a mindset of an editor, he would tell me, Mark, the biggest challenge that I have is that when day player actors come down here, they work really hard to be ready. And they're ready. But they're simply only ready to deliver their line. So no movie or television show cuts to Rochelle, she says what she has to say, then cuts back to Mark, he says what he has to say, cuts back to her. It starts on Rochelle, then it cuts to me as I'm listening to Rochelle to see how I'm reacting to what she's telling me. Well, if the actor is so ready to do their line and they prep nothing else, they're just kind of in a frozen state waiting for you to finish your line and deliver your cue so that they can deliver their line. Well, the editor cuts to the actor, and the actor's standing there like a dead dog, in a sense, just waiting on their moment to come alive. They're never going to end up in the cut. So that day I discovered, you know what? The trick is go do everything you can to give so much to the other actor that they give an Academy Award winning performance. Give to them. Your goal for the day is to go give everything you've got to them. If you're doing that and the camera is watching you, the editor's going to cut to you throughout the entire scene. Because you are that giving, you're listening that well, you're engaged on that level, and that's going to be what we are as the viewer. We're living the story through your reactions to each transformation, so to speak, right? So anyway, that ultimately leads up to, and there's a lot in between all of that, but 4.5 years ago, I just found myself traveling from North Carolina to Atlanta so often that finally my wife and I just picked up and left Wilmington after 30 years and moved to Atlanta. So we've been there for 4 years. And, it's a learning curve. We're going to get into asking, and I'm going to answer every question I can possibly answer for you today, but just understand, even before we get launched into this, that it's a learning curve for all of us, and I'm still trying to navigate it. Here's the number one thing to think about. I'm on your side 100%. I want to do whatever I can do to help you navigate this very challenging journey of acting in film and television. I know how difficult it is. I've seen everything imaginable behind the scenes. But whether it happens here or whether it happens on the East Coast or whether it happens in Texas or wherever, I want to do whatever I can today to help you answer some of the questions that you have. I'm currently working on a show for Fox called The Resident, which is Bruce Greenwood, and yeah, thank you. And we're in our 4th season of MacGyver. I don't know how many more years we have with that show, but of course Lisa May. So to clarify, Craig is my brother, and then Craig met Lisa about 7 years after we started our company in the late '80s, and they got married. And she was a journalism major from University of Georgia, and she just fell right into this as if this was her calling as well, and she has done unbelievable work. I brag on her work all the time. Rectify is probably the most unheralded television series in the history of television in terms of craft. If you haven't seen it, Rectify, it was on Sundance, and that's why it didn't really get a lot of coverage. It is truly the best depiction of what the South is really like, not Hollywood's version of the South. It's really what the South is like. Lisa May has done every single episode of The Walking Dead, and now we do the Fear of the Walking Dead in Austin, and we do a new show in Richmond, Virginia, based on the same series. So that has been a show we've been connected to of late. So I think that brings us up.
Yeah. Awesome. It's great to hear some of your history. But getting current, can you just give us, before we begin, I've got the biggest stack of questions I think we've ever had for anybody. But can you just give us the lay of the land? What, as you perceive it, is the current state of play in locals actor casting?
It's changed a lot. The actors have earned it. I know actors feel really, really frustrated sitting in Atlanta. They think they never get a chance to do guest stars and that kind of stuff. But it's if you're believing that, then you don't really know what's going on behind the scenes. I put guest stars on The Resident on a pretty regular basis. Not every episode, but enough. Melissa McBride was an example I used. Anybody know who Melissa McBride is? Atlanta actress, came in to do 2 episodes on the first couple episodes of The Walking Dead, and she is the star of The Walking Dead. And there's a lot of work. I think there were 40 shows going on at the end of this past year, and a lot of television, so that's every 7 days. There's, and they're not necessarily... I think the market in Atlanta is you have to be willing to take what's available. And if you just want to be working, then you can be working. And you may do 3 lines this week with Bruce Greenwood, or you may be a guest star next week with whoever, right? And I think that's the biggest adjustment for many of the actors, and there are a lot of actors who did 20 years here in Los Angeles and have now moved to Atlanta, and it's been kind of hard to make that adjustment to say, you know what, I will do a co-starring role. Because if I just say I'm only going to do guest star, then you are going to be somewhat limited in that market. Not that they're not available, and if your resume is as deep as many of them are, and your demo reels prove it, then I can go to the producers and say, guest star actor living in Atlanta, is going to save you a heck of a lot of money to cast him here other than there. And they go, you're right. And the perfect example, The Resident, every week, you know, I get on with Scott Gangaker, who's the casting director here, with the producers and the director, and we all go through all the roles. And then they'll just know for sure that these top 2 roles are definitely coming from LA or New York. But then there'll be the next 3, and the next 3, they'll say, let's look in Atlanta, let's look in New York, let's look in LA. So every one of those roles, you're on equal playing field. And because they're guest stars here, they're going to pay them as guest stars there. And I basically kind of demand that that's what they do. If there's any question about it, we generally put it in the breakdown. We'll say may or may not be, guest star. And that goes on The Walking Dead, that goes on all these shows. It's still hard for me. I only know about the films and projects that we're working on. I can't keep up with all the other projects. There are now, I think, close to 10 casting directors living in Atlanta. So if there's 10 and they're all working, there's 10 shows right there. Between Lisa May and I, we're doing 5 or 6. So I can't really speak to literally all the other work and how many actors are getting jobs on all these other shows. We're going to get into this, I'm sure, at some point, because local casting is we need to talk about what is local casting and all of that. But Atlanta is not going away. Pinewood Studios came there 4 years ago. The last 4 Marvel movies have been filmed in that space, just south of Atlanta. There's now been a neighborhood built across the street. And this year is going to be a big announcement that the entire area is going to be renamed. And it'll be a city. And it'll be city to tell stories to go to the world. And there will be a push to bring in the best showrunners, the best writers, the best directors to come live, work, and play there. And there's going to be a lot of money, a lot of support behind this. So there's a bright future there. I think the biggest advantage that my wife and I have discovered in Atlanta is simply the airport. It's 20 minutes from our house and I can go anywhere in the world. And there's 10 different airlines that are competing for my business, so the rates are very affordable. When I was in Wilmington, you had to take a shuttle plane over to Charlotte, and then even Charlotte would have to go to New York or go to Miami or go somewhere to go anywhere. So, Atlanta is positioned beautifully to really continue to have a tremendous amount of production happening there. Obviously, Los Angeles has a long, long history. There's still an awful lot of work that takes place here. It's just it's been around longer, so there's that many more agents, that many more actors. It's just a little bit harder journey. But it's getting harder in Atlanta as well, which we'll get to.
Right. So one thing I want to make sure I understand that you've touched on a little bit is if you're in LA and you are a good actor and you are willing to do co-star and guest star roles, is it realistic to think that you can move to Atlanta and make a living as an actor?
Well, what comes to mind is, are you making a living here in Los Angeles as an actor? If you're making a living here in Los Angeles as an actor, then stay here because you're making the market work for you. If you're not making a living here as an actor, then you might consider Atlanta because it's certainly not going to cost you any more to live than it does to live in Los Angeles, right? I mean, that's and if you're uncertain, then consider coming to Atlanta for a year. Do 1 year, make a 1 year commitment, get an apartment, come there, get involved in one of the 2 or 3 really good acting schools, because there's 2 or 3 that are very good, and all the top actors are working together on a regular basis. They're all helping each other. They're all inspiring each other. It's really, I don't know the Los Angeles community in terms of what the morale is and all that. But what I've always experienced on the East Coast, in my experience, is that in a sense, we all feel like we're in this together, and so we do the best we can, and we certainly want to get the roles. But if we don't begrudge our fellow actor. We cheer them on, and we're excited for them. Would you say that's true, Roddy? Yeah. So that's a positive. Ultimately, I think it all comes down to life, your own life. What is it that you want out of your life? Because at the end of the day, the acting jobs or the series regular job or even the Academy Award is going to come up empty. It's not what life is. Might be a part of your life, but that's not what life is. Find a life. And if your life is here and it's awesome here, awesome, stay here and make it work for you. But if you want to consider a whole new life, which is really more about your life, being able to be involved with your family, being able to be involved with your next door neighbors, being able to be involved in church, synagogue, communities, whatever, to have a life, and then this just happens to be the extension or the profession of your life. By the grace of God, I discovered that a long time ago when I stood at the grave of my college roommate. After the 6th movie I did of the 23, I get the phone call. And his mom asked me to come eulogize him, and I couldn't do it. And it's just because I'd never stood at a gravesite and pondered eternity and pondered what really is relevant in life. And so at that point, it kind of did a shift in me, and I thought, you know what? People are what life's about. And every actor that I ever had chance to meet, work with, get to know, I know it may be a fleeting moment, but it's a moment where they're either going to walk away feeling a little lift or dejected yet again. And I want them to walk away having had a little lift, whether they get the job or not, because you matter, you're important, you're valuable. And I think when you have that as a security within your soul, you're going to be the best actor anybody could ever meet. I really believe that, because there's no pretense anymore. You're secure whether you get the job or not. You're secure whether you win the Academy Award or not. That's not relevant to your security, your identity, to any of that. Anyway, I don't even know how I went down this road. I guess I pray about everything, so it shouldn't be unexpected. No, really, I think that is genuinely to the root of the matter. About what do you want out of your life? I can tell you, you can get some really good acting jobs, and you might even get a super guest star, which might lead to a series regular in Atlanta. That also could happen in Los Angeles. But would you rather do your life in Los Angeles, or would you rather do your life in Charlotte, North Carolina, and commute down to Atlanta, or in Atlanta, or in Wilmington along the coast of the other coast? I think those are the key questions for you to really put on paper and then decide, because you're going to be supported there. I would feel like maybe more so in a way, just in terms of community, than you are here. I don't know, because I don't live that experience in Atlanta, but I know that there's a lot of community gatherings. And listen, I think right now, before we even go any further, you should applaud Rochelle and SAG Foundation, what they do.
Thank you.
Seriously, what they do to help you, to encourage you, to remind you of your value, to remind you that they're here because they want you to have the best education, the best resources available to you to be successful. They do it as well as any organization I've ever seen.
Thank you. What did they say at the beginning? Kindest man in show business, right? So sort of the flip side of this conversation, I think, is LA actors working as local hires.
Yeah.
Can you speak to that conversation? Because there are pros and there are cons.
Yep.
And I don't know that actors are thinking about it from your perspective.
Right. Bottom line is, if you live here and this is your residence for the next 6 months, don't try and do local hire in Atlanta. Now, if you are from Atlanta and the house that you graduated from high school is in Atlanta and your mom and dad or brother or sister are still in that house, then you can do it. But this is what you will have to do. If you audition here for a television series episode and you get cast on the episode, you better be in Atlanta during every single day of that episode. Case in point, did Nashville television series for 6 years. Several actors had started in Atlanta, moved to LA, so they had an Atlanta agent. They taped from LA. I booked them on the gig. It's going to shoot on Friday. They booked their flight for Thursday morning really early so they can get in there in time to be able to do a fitting on Thursday afternoon, get checked into the hotel to do their work on Friday. Monday night, 10:30, I get a phone call from the ADs. It's pouring down rain all day tomorrow. I got to have your actors from Friday tomorrow morning, 5 a.m. You can't make it. You look bad. Agent looks bad. I look worse to the producer because I cast a day player out of LA. And there's no way around it. You can't get your car and drive. You're 3 time zones away. So if you even consider putting yourself in a situation like that, you come to Atlanta, you sit in that house from episode day 1 to day 10 because you need to be in town if that situation presents itself. I've also had many times, and I didn't even add into the fact that if you, let's just say it's not the next morning, it's the next day, you've still got to move your flight from Thursday to Tuesday. They're going to charge you $250 flight change, and all of a sudden it starts adding up, and now you've paid to come work on the job because you spent so much money to try and navigate this regional hire thing. There are actors that come out here for January, February, March, pilot season or whatever. I encourage them to do that. If they really have the contacts and they're really going to be reading a lot, they ought to be here. But then their agent should tell me, hey, Tom is in LA January, February, but Tom still wants to be considered for the guest star stuff you're doing or for the pilot episodes that you're doing in Atlanta. Just beware, that's where they are. As long as I know it, I know how to navigate it, okay? There are casting directors in Atlanta told by actors and agents that require that you be a local hire. And they put it in their original thing. And so you're like, yeah, but I still want an opportunity to be on the job even though I'm not a local hire. And so you're stuck. So let's just say even that you live in Orlando, but not Atlanta. And you can just drive up and you can say, hey, I can be local, but that's not right because the Screen Actors Guild contract says if you don't live in the town, then you need to get 30 cents a mile, you need to get hotel, and you need to get per diem for having to travel from Orlando into Atlanta. I've been doing that for 38 years, protecting actors because that's the contract I know the producer signs with the union. So when it's not being done and not being supported, I'll be honest with you, it's frustrating to me because I feel like everything I've done to protect the actor to get what they should get when an actor accepts to do a local hire job and not get their coverage expenses, it's kind of like throwing me under the bus. When in effect, I've really been working really, really hard to protect the actor and the producer. I'm protecting the producer too, because if the producer gets caught doing that, they'll get grieved and then it'll be a whole other issue. Anyway, maybe there'll be more questions about that. Was I clear in terms of local and not local? Okay.
So we, of course, do have a ton of questions about that. And I think that you've sort of touched on all bases, but I'm going to get specific with some of them. So Sean Passwaters, where are you, Sean?
Right
Sean's asking if there are any legal ramifications or expectations in terms of an address if an actor is claiming to be a local hire. Do you know if there are any legal ramifications?
Wow, that's a good question. To be honest, I don't. Meaning, like, if you put in an address and then, God forbid, something happens between you coming to the set or not, and now checking that address and that's not actually your address, or some situation like that? Or
if it's a family house, but you're not necessarily resident.
Or if it's a post office box, right? Right? No, I understand. The fact is, all of your contracts, all of your checks, everything's going to go to that address that you gave them. On the legal side, I wish I could answer. I can't answer that.
That's fine. I know that there are tax ramifications that, if you are claiming that you're a local hire and you're earning money in Georgia, then you have to pay tax in Georgia.
Correct.
Can you tell us any more about the tax situation in terms of working as a local hire? Maybe it's not something you can speak to.
Yeah, no, it's not in my...
but I know that that's something that we should all be cognizant of and find the answers to if you are...
Well, yeah, and I would say legally, if you are getting hired on a job from a Georgia address, then yes, you have a responsibility to pay taxes to Georgia for that job. And... you would have to pay fines and everything else if it was ultimately discovered.
Okay, then Taji has a little technical question. Taji, where are you?
Yeah, see, back there, Taji.
Right.
Hey.
So Taji is asking whether or not there is a cap on hiring local actors versus non-local actors in terms of the tax incentive for productions.
I don't really know all the ins and outs of the tax, but it's never a conversation that ever comes up. If, I think the most extreme example is Glory Road, which did in New Orleans 6 or 7 years ago, and I think they brought 12 actors from LA, but we cast 110 additional actors out of Louisiana. So I think Louisiana had some different nuances to their tax incentive in terms of, if you're a Louisiana resident, they get credit. If you're not, if I was bringing them out of Georgia, then they weren't, kind of added into the tax rebate. But I don't follow that so much. Some of the biggest challenges that I have had is the local New Orleans agents would even get frustrated when I would bring an actor from Atlanta or Orlando or whatever, or Houston, Texas. But at the end of the day, I want the very best actor in the job. So if it means going 300 miles away and paying a little extra in hotel and per diem and travel, then I think it's worth it for the overall integrity of the project. So I've always approached it from that, not, they're local, you have to hire all the local actors. Yes, we try and hire every actor we possibly can in the local region. And in fact, there used to be a preference of employment thing, I think, within the Screen Actors Guild contract, but that term hadn't been used in probably 20 years. You got to remember, when I started, literally, there was one Screen Actors Guild actor in the entire state of North Carolina. Yeah, it was. Our shows were all union because they were Dino, and we had big name stars, but none of the actors were union, and the agents weren't union because the agents did a lot of non-union work. And as soon as they would sign on with the Screen Actors, in those days, if they signed on with Screen Actors Guild, they had to kind of lay aside the non-union work. Well, they couldn't do that. The non-union work, it was their bread and butter. So there was a whole transitional period that happened in that first 10 or 15 years. But I was very thankful for the union from day one because they were my defense against shrewd producers, right? I mean, they were. Producers wanted to take advantage of this and that and the other, and I would say, wait a minute, look on page 7A. And they'd read it, and I'd go, you gonna hold me to that? And you signed the contract.
All right, so I have an anonymous question, if you can speak to this. For black women, is the casting market stronger, do you think, in Los Angeles or Atlanta? Do you have a sense of that?
Atlanta is such a diverse market. I don't know. I'm sure I will say this, in the last 10 years, diversity is the number one issue forecasting on everything we do. So to answer that question, yes, African American women actually have an advantage over Caucasian women, Asian women, or not necessarily. It is something that we dialogue about because it's the real world, and for many, many years, Hollywood didn't paint a picture of the real world. So I've been involved as much as anybody in trying to always bear that in mind. But, look, Tyler Perry has set up shop and owns one of the largest studios in the world in Atlanta. And most of his work is set in the African-American community. So obviously, Tyler Perry's not in Los Angeles, right? And so maybe there is more of a opportunity in Atlanta than in LA, but that would be hard to answer specifically.
Okay. So Leslie Thurston, Leslie has
a
question.
Leslie.
Talking about, working as a local, is a Southeast rep needed to get work in the Southeast? Because so many of the roles are booked out of the agents that you might have in New York or Los Angeles. Should somebody who can work as a local hire get local representation as well?
You have to, because when we go out, we don't go out in New York and LA. We go out strictly in the Southeast. And for us, the Southeast would be about 9 states from Virginia down to Florida and over to Texas. And that's kind of the world of 500 miles that I've worked in my whole career. And now, within that group of states, is about 145 agents I go out to for every project that I go out on. That's how it's changed. Thank you. Yeah.
And you have associates in several different markets, correct? Yeah. Can you tell us about those other markets as well and how those offices are working?
Absolutely. Excited to tell you about that. We have Meredith, who is our associate in Wilmington, and in Wilmington is where my brother Craig and Lisa May still are. I am in Atlanta with Kimberly Wisted. Kimberly actually has just graduated up this year to casting director in our office. She's casting director on Fear of the Walking Dead. And then we have Lizzie Gant in Austin, Texas. And she covers several of our shows that don't even shoot in Austin, but she covers one of our shows. That's one of the Walking Dead series shows in Austin. But she's my associate on The Resident, because we do everything online anymore, which is a whole other conversation. But she can handle all the paperwork, and we can just, kind of go out, get on the phone with the producers and directors, have the early conversations about what we're looking for, and we go at it together. All of this upcoming week, Meredith, Lizzie, Kimberly, and Lisa and I are visiting all the studio casting offices and basically saying to the executive at the casting offices that we're not just a couple of 60-year-olds. Our company is the new X generation, and they truly are our future. So we're bringing them all out and taking them to all the offices so that they can meet the casting directors, so the casting directors can get to know them, so the next 30 years can be just as bright of a F&A. We changed Fincannon Associates. We just rebranded it to F&A. And who you hiring? Yeah. So anyway, yes, we're passing on. Lizzie is incredible. Kimberly's incredible. Meredith's incredible. They're going to have a really bright future, I believe, in this industry. But so because of that, as shows come to the Southeast, we're also, just kind of reminding the studios that we have people in these different markets and we can cover these different markets, hopefully well for them.
So we've had a couple of questions as well from Scott and Jennifer Caldwell about New Mexico because of the NBC Universal deal and the Netflix deal. Can you tell us anything about New Mexico specifically?
Is anybody from that area in the room? Yeah? Okay. And but you're out here and you're trying to figure out whether or not you should go back, or you don't want to go back home?
She does.
Oh, you
she
do?
Wants to go back.
Well, it sounds unbelievably exciting, and I'm not as familiar with that market, but from what I hear through the, grapevine, so to speak, is over the last 5 years, there's just been tremendous amount of work in New Mexico, Phoenix, the Arizona area and all that, and obviously to the point that a studio feels like it's worth making an investment and going there. How far is that in terms of, is it drivable, or is it generally like a 2-hour flight from here to there? So it's an hour and a half. So, and if it's an hour and a half, then it's really probably only about 500 miles. It's 10 hours, so it's more like 700 miles or something. Anyway, I can't answer it from personal experience, but studios are, if they're investing the millions of dollars that we're reading about, then I would imagine it's going to be another market opportunity for you. So
I want to get away from the business a little bit and mine your expertise as it comes to craft, since we have you.
Yeah.
I want to ask some questions about auditioning and self-taping, especially self-taping, because I think it's born out of the business you were telling us about earlier in the locals when people were all over the place.
Yeah.
But the one thing I really want to start with is when we're booking co-star and guest star roles, why is it the de rigueur to get 24 hours to prep the material?
That's a good question, but I generally try and do 48 hours. I think you could look back. If I go out at 10 o'clock on a Monday morning, I'm not expecting it back in until Wednesday evening, 6 or 7 o'clock. That's generally mine. I can't answer for the other casting directors. I do hear from parents who have kids who are calling me going, hey, I just got this material from somebody else and they need it tomorrow night. And this is a kid and it's 4 pages of dialogue and they're in school. And I'm going, hey, it's funny because I just had this conversation about 4 days ago. And then when the casting director didn't get any tapes in, they had to extend it, right? So general rule to answer the question for me, and I think that's for Lisa, although I've never really talked to her about it. No, because literally we do our own shows and we're in our own space, and it's not like it's a corporate kind of rule that we have. We're just, and I'll talk to Lisa about that on Monday. But yeah, you should have more than 24 hours, to kind of put that together. And I want to give you all some background. During all those years, I was in the room and did the one-on-one audition with everybody. This all changed in 2008. And it was because we were doing One Tree Hill and we had a script every 8 days and we had to find 5 to 10 actors for that episode. And they used to drive from Atlanta 6.5 hours, get out of the car, go into a live session, do 2 lines of dialogue, get back in their car and drive back to Atlanta. This went on year after year after year. 2008, gas went to $4.50 a gallon. The housing market tanked, and it was costing $100 to come from Atlanta to Wilmington and back. And you were auditioning against 8 other people. So the actor said, I can't do that. So I said, please go to your agent's office. I'll fax you the sides. And if you'll just put it on tape and overnight the tape to me, I'll show the tape to the director. And that's what started taping. It was totally out of necessity. We had no other options. And then this younger generation of directors have lived in looking in this little box. And they haven't done a lot of this. And if you could just send me a link and I can look in this box and I can use my imagination in this box, I can say, I like that one. But if I've got to go in a room and say, hey, how you doing? No, I don't shake hands. I don't. Just do what you do. And then, and sadly, there's a lot of directors out there today. You show up on the set as an actor and that's about as much as you get, right? Some are great and they really help. There are others. Bobby De Niro was just there's a round table recently. If you haven't seen it, it's incredible. But Bobby was just talking about some directors, you show up and you just say, hey, not even worth it. I can tell right now, there's no point in having a conversation with this human being, right? Because they're not giving. You can tell they're not going to listen to new ideas, new thoughts, experiment. Anyway, so that's how we got to self-taping. And so then I spent probably 5 years just going all over the Southeast, talking with agents about what camera to get and how to light it and what not to do and what to do. And it was a real learning curve. We started... Well, from the very beginning, this is basically what I said. We were doing a Spielberg show, and he was on the set, and he needed to see some options. And this was early. I think the iPhone had been out a month. But we were able to navigate a couple demos, and then the demos went to his email address, and on the set, he watched it on his iPhone. your tape, every tape you send out should be presentable enough for Steven Spielberg to watch on a set. And if it's not, don't send it. Or for Mark Fincannon. No, genuinely, audio should be crisp so you don't have to push. You got to do whatever you got to do to get an overhead mic or a lavalier mic or something to where the reader is not 10 times the volume of you. The reader ought to be volume 1 and you ought to be volume 7. Lighting, you should have a little accent light behind you to give a little third dimension to your look. There should be nothing behind your backdrop, should just be straightforward. And speaking of Spielberg again, I'll never forget, he sent us in the mail a 8 by 11 piece of paper that he had taken himself and drawn a circle of a face, an eye, nose, mouth. Said, this is how I want you to frame every audition. Because Steven wants to get into the soul of the actor. Everything lives in the eye of the actor. Everything lives in the internal. If we're way back here in your little head like that, I used to do that with headshots. Because there was a longest time when a headshot used to be chorus line, right? Pretty much you stand there on the stage and you put it up and it's basically your head. But then all the photographers in LA are going, oh no, you need the new latest thing. So you'll stick out and then your head's about this big and you got this body and you're, looking cool, but your head's about this big. So at the end of the audition, when I'm putting up the final choices up on the wall, 3 of them are the full face and 2 of them is a 1-inch little face there. Who's going to win the day in that situation? So I used to just say over and over, it's a headshot. Nothing else, it's a headshot.
I want to pick up.
Where were we? Oh, we're talking about self-taping. So genuinely work hard at figuring out how to play your scenes in close-up, because it's really about what's going on with you in this moment. When and I'm watching more when you're listening than when you're talking. Don't forget. And the silence is as important as the speaking. Any piece of music, many times the silence is 10 times more powerful than the note before and after. So that's the way you should approach even your approach to life. I mean, in life we do that, right?
I have a question from Michelle Lukerman. There's Michelle in the middle over there.
Michelle.
So Michelle says, for self-tapes, especially shorter auditions, how do you approach multiple takes? Do you do totally different interpretations or just subtle tweaks? And do you just send 2 takes, or how many takes would you send if they're all great?
Great question. I generally would love a couple of takes. 3 would be the max, but generally 2 is fine. And so... but put them in separate clips. That way, if I like the first one, but I say, hey, I'd just love to see what else they did in the second take, I'll look at it. If I like the second one best, I'll hide the first one. I'll send the second one.
So with these audition clips, how important is a slate? I'm sure you give very specific details. Can you?
I don't. I'm terrible with that.
Oh, okay. So what
I'll give
should
it
a
here.
slate look like? Yeah.
Generally, it used to be slate up front and all that. Now I just basically prefer you do a slate, do it at the end. It should have a full body, close up, and then a full body and out. Straight, simple, say your name. And but do it as a separate clip. I move them around, and it's always at the end. And it's a clip down there. So if the director decides they want to see it, it's there and available to them. But rarely do they ever look at the slate.
So I have a specific question from Gregory Albrecht.
Yeah, Greg.
Yeah. So Greg is a veteran of the Marines, and so he says if he's auditioning for a military role, should he mention in his slate that he is a former Marine?
Yeah, I don't see how that hurts you. I think it needs to be really, really quick. You should just say it right at the end, so that that's what you kind of leave them with. But yeah, I think anything that you have a specialty in, and if it's specific to the role, you should make that note.
So Z. James has a question I'm sure we all know the answer to. Are you open to bringing in stunt performers who are also actors?
We do it every episode of MacGyver, because so much of MacGyver is physical, and we travel all over the world with every episode. So I'll call the stunt coordinator after our concept meeting, and I'll say, hey, these 2 roles, take a bullet hit, get involved in a fight. I'm going to see some actors who have some stunt experience, but you should get your stunt players to audition for these couple roles as well. You send them to me. We'll send them all as one batch to the producer and director, so they don't really know which ones are actors and which ones are stunt, and they make that decision, and we rock and roll. So, yeah.
Now that you're in Atlanta and so much is casting in Atlanta, what's the sort of proportion of self-tape versus people that come into your office?
For television, it's truly self-tape only because of the pace we're moving at. I don't even know how I used to do it. I got to be honest with you. The Resident had 24 characters in one episode. How did I even? Well, you know what? Quite honestly, Dawson's Creek always just had 1 or 2 or 3 per episode. I mean, it was just a pretty straightforward show. They had so many regulars that they filled up the words on the page of every episode. But a show like The Resident, and we have 5 or 6 regulars, but there's an awful lot of exposition, an awful lot of actors. So, but if I had 24 roles to cast, and then I need to go to my office and see 10 actors per role, potentially, that's 240 actors. How many days would it take me to see 240 actors? And also in the old days, if I flew into Atlanta and I really could only see on a long day 70, 75 actors in a long day, then that's all the choices that I had for the movie. Today, I might have 150 actors for the same movie. Therefore, in my mind, I'm looking under more rocks. And I can do that very efficiently and very quickly because of this process. It makes it harder for the actor because you're competing against 150 instead of 75. But if you're on your game and you do your game well, all that's irrelevant too, right? It doesn't matter whether it's 150 or 75.
So with the self-taped auditions, do you expect everybody to be off book?
I would, at the end of the day, say it would absolutely be to your advantage because your competition is. In the old days, well, here's another issue that I really never even entertained until a couple years ago. Because you audition for tape so often, if and when you do get a callback, oh my goodness, you've got to go in a room, be with a director. I mean, I'm just saying, this is happening. And so I think that's why you should be in acting classes, because you should be putting yourself in that position as often as you can. The self-tape is all, and it's with actors, and you're trying to have a transformative moment. But you've always just got to keep open that, hey, tomorrow I may go in and do this live, and it's going to be with a strange group in a strange room with the director and the pressure of that. I need to just settle myself into that right now. But television generally is tape only. Features always callbacks. We do pre-reads through tapes, but because you're dealing with a big screen, a big movie, and we have 12 weeks instead of 7 days, then we'll be bringing actors in and reading, face-to-face with casting director, and then probably a callback, yet a third callback with the director.
So I have about pilot season. So yeah, Z is referring to pilot season when some lucky actors are auditioning 4 or 5 times a day, a week. And so and again, the 24-hour thing with co-stars and guest stars, it can, I'm assuming that casting directors understand that those are the conditions that some LA actors are working under. Right.
Actually, I'm blanking now. What was that original question?
So it was...
Oh, being off book. Yeah. Well, you might have to make a choice to do 3 instead of 5, because you're better bringing in 3 phenomenal performances than you are to give 5 mediocre.
So Jennifer Yoon is asking you, if you had free reign, what genre medium would you choose? And is there any director that you would love to work with that you haven't previously worked with?
That's a great question. I just want to change the world positively. So I want to work on projects that aren't Capricorn. They used to call Frank Capra. But if I could ever be involved in a film on the level of Frank Capra, of course I'd want to do that. So I'm not into horror. I'm not into some of this other stuff. Personally, that doesn't mean my company doesn't do plenty of it. So that hopefully that answers your question. Director. It's hard to answer that. I've worked with just about everybody you can name. I mean, and I don't mean that to brag at all. I just really have worked with, I mean, Taylor Hackford was incredible on the movie Ray, and I've done 3 other films with Taylor since then. I just worked with a guy named Michael Carney, and we just did an independent film in South Georgia. And the guy is like a sculptor. He's like an artist. And that's who I like to work with. Somebody who in the middle of the night is going to go, you know, that paint color I put on yesterday was just not right. And they get up in the morning and they go dip the brush and they say, hey, I want to, metaphorically, I want to take that person out of that role and move them over to that role. And I think this person ought to come in here. And then you're just going, oh, I get it, you know. So I like the... You know, quite honestly, there were many reasons to move to Atlanta. But one vivid memory was I did Miracles from Heaven with Jennifer Garner, thank you. And the director was Patricia Reagan. And she was awesome. And she was so hands-on and so hungry for getting in and getting dirty and creating as great a movie as we can collaboratively. And I was living in Wilmington at the time, but they were shooting in Atlanta. So I found myself over there going to the production office every day and just talking with Patricia and working through. And I just missed that after the world of self-tape and all that stuff. And so I just thought, you know, if I'm over the next 10 years going to be doing all these shows in Atlanta, I can't see a picture where I'm jumping on a plane every Monday morning or even in my car and driving to Atlanta to stay for the week and work on a show. I want to be on the set. I want to be, or not on the set, but I want to be involved in pre-production. I want to be involved with the real people. I want to be involved with the team that has to come together to bring these films together. So it was a key reason of moving, you know, to Atlanta. So a director, I don't know the answer to that.
Great artists.
We have a question there.
Oh, no, that was the question I asked. Any director you enjoy working with?
Well, yeah, Taylor was just a wonderfully collaborative. Who else? I mean, you know, David Lynch was a wonderful creative guy as well. He would just, Mark, just don't let anything stop your imagination. Whatever comes to mind, bring it to me. And so that freedom is wonderful. I did The Prince of Tides with Barbra Streisand, would certainly have to be one of the highlights of my career. And quite honestly, as I look back at that movie, I just remember, I mean, literally, I went and did open calls in malls in 3 cities in the South to find the kids. Because if you ever go back and watch that film, we have Nick Nolte, Melinda Dillon, and then we didn't have the adult of the brother, but it was a story about 2 brothers and a sister growing up along the coast of South Carolina. Well, when we open the movie, we see them at 4 and 5 years old. Later in the movie, we see them at 10 and 11. And then yet again later, we see them at 15 and 16. They needed to look like Nick, feel like Nick, sound like Nick. They needed to feel like Melinda, look like Melinda, sound like Melinda. And then the third one, even though we didn't see them as adult, the 3 that were below needed to match each other. And the middle group were involved in a rape sequence that was very respectfully done. Nothing was over the top, but that's what really happened in the story. So that was the story to process and to work through. But anyway, so there's 9 kids right there. And at those ages, you weren't going to agencies and finding those kids. And I'm as proud of that work as, as soon as I want to say I'm as proud of this movie as it's unfair because there's so many other movies that I would tell you to go back that I'm proud of too. I hope someday to maybe cut my own demo reel, just looking at some of those, performances over the years that y'all deserve the credit for. I just happen to be the conduit in the middle to be a part of the overall process of it.
Awesome. Last question from
Yep.
Julia Fasadi.
Hi, Julia.
She says, what would you say makes an actor stand out from the crowd during an
Just
audition?
came to me because you get asked that question at every one of these. And I was going into with Megan Lewis and 2 or 3 other casting directors on a panel in Atlanta about a year ago, and it genuinely hit me on the way in. I think it's heart. Because your heart is where your soul is. Your heart is where emotion is. Your heart is where interaction, reaction. So instead of approaching it from an external perspective, what do I look like? What do I sound like? Is it working physically, externally? Find a way to discover the heart of the character. Allow the heart of that character to come forth through in the scene. I did a film 15 years ago in the jungles of Ecuador, a story about 5 missionary couples in their 20s who moved to the jungle to do Bible translation for people groups who had never seen a Bible. They not only had never seen a Bible, they didn't even have a written language. So these young couples would go and live with them for 40 years, help them create an alphabet, and then create a written language, and then begin in the book of Genesis and start. And 40 years later, they hand them the entire Bible in their own language. Yeah, Wycliffe Bible translators. This was a true story that happened in the 50s. And while they were in a plane one day, they saw this tribe that no one had ever made contact with. And they were a terrifying tribe. They were known as headhunters. They carried 10-foot spears. I didn't want to go too far down this road. I ultimately want to get to, bottom line is, my job was to go down. They wrote it from the point of view of the naked savages, not the point of view of the missionaries. So there were 27 roles to cast out of indigenous peoples in the jungles of Ecuador. Simple enough. So I went to Panama and literally ended up in a canoe going up into the rainforest of Panama and found 3 villages of indigenous peoples. And over the next 6 months, did a school, trained them. 27 of them played roles in the movie. They've never been to a movie, yet they played the roles. I learned more on that journey than any acting class I ever took or any room I've ever been in the North America, because God, I want to kind of keep this short as I can, and I know we're running out of time. When I finally realized that I'm going to go through this process the same way I do here, I'm going to pull a scene or two, and I'm going to give it to the native, and I'm going to say, I want y'all to read through this together and just create an interpretation. What do you think they felt? What do you think they whatever? So we realized they speak their own language, which was Zimbabwe, but they also speak Spanish across Panama. So we just assumed that they all, and they do all speak Spanish. Well, we only had an English script. So we spent 3.5 weeks translating the script from English into Spanish. So then I get in the canoe, I go up to all the rivers, I pass out all the sides to all of them, and I said, I'm coming back 3 weeks from now. Y'all study these sides while I'm gone, and when I come back, we'll go through them. So I come back, we start the process. 3 ladies are sitting on a church pew. There was a church there off the river that let us use their fellowship hall. And I just see these 3 ladies sitting there now with their scripts in their laps, and they're just looking at my translator. Their scripts are just riddled with red mud because they live in the rainforest, but they have them with them. And I said, hey, ask them if they have any questions about the material, what they've read or whatever. And she asked them, and they're just... And I said, what's going on? Ask them if, what did they think about what they read? And so she asked again, and then she turns to me and she says, they speak Spanish, but they don't read Spanish. So I had the director with me. The director had done a documentary a year before this film with the people, living with the people. I said, Jim, come over here and tell these 3 ladies what experience was like for a Waodani woman in 1952 living in the jungles of Ecuador. And Jim began to share about the challenges of living indigenously in this world. And these women began to weep because they related. Well, then when we stood up to do the scenes, I realized in that moment, it's not about words. It's about a transformation. It's about saying, I understand the context of this so profoundly. Kick me out there and let's see what happens. And that's what happened with these women. The very first scene, the woman is coming into the scene. Her husband has 3 spears through his body and he is dying. His 13-year-old daughter is standing beside him and she's holding her newborn baby. The mother is realizing when the father dies, there's no one to hunt meat for them as a family. They cannot live off berries. She's holding berries in her hand, and she looks at her daughter, and she looks at her husband, and she looks back at her daughter, and she said, it's better that we suffocate the baby and that we suffocate you and put you in the grave with your father because we can't live off of this. They had a whole spiritual kind of aspect of their culture as well, that if a man died, he could demand that a child or two be suffocated and put in the grave with him so that when he goes from this life to the next life, his soul does not go alone. He's able to go with another soul. So that was part of the context of this. But the deeper context of this was just, so anyway, this woman comes walking in with these berries and she looks at the husband and looks back at the daughter and looks at them. When she looks at the daughter, when she started to try and share with the daughter what she was trying to say, words would not even come out. Her mouth just started drooling. Her tears, her face just started filling up. And then she went to anger and she threw the berries on the ground and said whatever she said. I don't understand what she said. And then turned and went into the corner of the room and just fell into a ball of emotion. And I went over and sat down with her and just said, tell me, what was that? She said, I've never stepped into a situation like that. But when I got there, it felt as real as anything I've ever done. And I knew in that moment, this is just the first of what we will watch to be amazing. I tell you that story to say your approach should be that. Approach it without the words first, and then try and bring the words into the scene, because obviously you got to know the words. Obviously you got to say the words, but words just give us the information to carry us through the story. They're not necessarily the heart of the story, right? The heart of the story is living the experience. Golly, I don't even remember now what the first question was, but it was about approach, and it was about, how you can best the question was about heart. So these women allowed their hearts to be touched by identifying. I remember I did a bit of a documentary about that casting process, and I just remember thinking, they know how to feel what other people feel. That's, I think, the statement. Can you put yourself into a situation where you would feel what Richard Jewell felt? Right? Falsely accused, day in and day out. What did he feel when he laid his head down at night? What were his nights like? When he got up to just try and go into the office and there were, media all out by his car. What did he really feel? Can you find a way to go there? And it won't be about words. Oh, I'm just feeling really kind of betrayed here. I'm feeling like I'm living in the Twilight Zone. No, you live that. You don't have to say it. Hopefully that answers what I'm looking for. Okay? Yeah. I also love the metaphor that there's a certain power that resides within us, like the man backstage, that if we will trust that what is within us can come forth, if we'll just trust it, then we will be a bit braggadocio like Barney was when you see and feel and experience this divine encounter. Because I do believe in so many ways that transformations are divine. I mean, all artistic essence of story, of emulating story, of reproducing story, of art in any form comes from some place that, though we in this industry want to put people up on a stage and give them trophies, it's so... When you've been doing it as long as I have, and when you have actually gone and gotten an Emmy and walked off the stage and returned home, you realize it really is not about any of that. It's really, honestly, it's not. The next day is another day, the next week's another week, and if you thought that in some way was going to be the thing, the ultimate reward, trust me. Ask anybody who has them. They'll tell you the same. It's why over the years, some of these actors don't come and participate in those things. And people want to look down on them like they're weirdos. The truth is, it's all show. It's all about selling more tickets so that, and in the Emmy category in particular, here I'm going down another trail. In the Emmy category, just as a category, now that I'm a voter, when do you think I have the opportunity to see the 5,000 hours of television to then cast a vote and make a judgment on what was the best television last year? Not possible. So when I've got my ballot in front of me, and this is the case for every single person that has a ballot in front of them, you have a certain respect for the people that are in it, the actor, whoever the casting director was, who wrote the show or whatever, and you base your decision on that. It might even be the mores of the day. And quite honestly, if you look at these shows and you really dissect them and tear them down, the votes are based on the proclivity of the day, the year, the whatever. It's not necessarily the very best work of that year, okay? So just keeping it all in perspective, bring it down to your life, to every day. I'll just close in the shortened version of the story. Robert Downey Jr. I did Due Date, which was a comedy with Zach Galifianakis and Downey. And there was an actor from California who flew out, and he was working for one day, and I'd known him 20 years earlier, and he just happened to call me and said, hey, I saw you on the cast list. Why don't you come by and have lunch? So I went by to have lunch with him. He'd done his scene that morning with Robert Downey. And I said, look, I've never worked with Downey. I never stood in the same space, but I just admire his approach to the work since his reformation, so to speak. And what was your experience with him like this morning? He said, you wouldn't believe it. And I said, what? He said, I was in my trailer, and I opened the door, and Robert's standing there. He says, James Martin Kelly? Yeah. Hey, I'm Robert. Can I come in? He said, Robert came into my trailer. He sat down. We just started talking. We talked for about 5 minutes. He got up and said, I'll see you on the set. He stepped off the step and slammed the door. I don't remember a thing he said to me. I don't remember what I said to him. But the impact was, he made me feel like I was the star of the film. So when I left the trailer door this morning, all I wanted to do was go give back to him all that he gave to me in that moment. And when we started the scene and started the walk and talk, and I gave him everything like I shared with you earlier, he just plugged right into that, and it was the most incredible dance I've ever had in my life. It's about giving. Think about the other person. Do that in life, but also take that to the set. Take it into your craft. It will make you 10 times the actor, I promise you. That's what I have. That's what I have.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Mark, for giving us your time, your energy, your expertise. Thank you.